of shadows follows.
Hi my angels, it's Hailey, Reese, and I hope that you guys are having a fantastic morning, afternoon, night, whatever it is for you when today's video finally reaches you. Today's video is one that I knew I had to make. Like, this video, you guys, could very well, or probably will actually, change your perception of all of the different movies that we used to watch as children growing up, and just really surprise you when you hear it. Like, I don't know about you guys, but for so many of these Disney films, the way that I remember them, or at least the way that I perceived them as a child, is the complete opposite of what these movies were actually about, and it blew my mind. So here's the thing. I've always known that in Disney films, there's subliminal messages, there's hidden things, that sometimes there's a darker backstory behind it than we recognized as children. And I was okay with that. I'd watched a lot of different conspiracy theories on it. I'd watched a whole bunch of videos on things like that, and I kind of knew about it. In fact, I think a while back, I did a whole video, or I know a while back, I did a whole video on different like Disney movies and what they originally were versus the versions that we were shown as kids. And that was pretty dark as well. They all kind of came from like a darker origin. However, as I'm sure you guys know, Disney Plus became a huge thing once it launched and released. And at first, I didn't think I was gonna give into the hype of it, but once I did, it was like the best thing that I ever did. Tyler and I, every single night recently, have been watching all of like the classic Disney films that we loved as kids and watching them with like this whole new perception now that we're adults and seeing like the adult humor in it and the hidden things that innocent children never really picked up on. And so we were having a lot of fun doing that. And then we watched Pinocchio. And can I just tell you guys that what I perceived Pinocchio to be growing up and what I thought Pinocchio was about as a grown adult who watched it as a kid is not at all what Pinocchio's about. And Pinocchio is very well, in my personal opinion, one of the darkest Disney films I watched as a kid. But now that I'm doing this video, I'm gonna dive deeper into other Disney films and break down those theories too. And if there's any good ones, I will definitely bring them here on my channel. But this has to be a video because I wanna know how many of you guys overlooked the true concept of Pinocchio and the storyline of Pinocchio, because I'm just mind blown. So without further ado, let's break down Pinocchio. Now, I kind of want to start this video by quickly doing an overview of the storyline of Pinocchio. I'm going to take you guys from the beginning to the end of the film and kind of just touch on the big moments of it, and then break down why it's so deeply disgusting and disturbing and creepy and just like weird to be a children's movie, and weird that I didn't pick up on it. All right, actually, okay, first and foremost, I want to tell you guys what I thought Pinocchio was. So I watched Pinocchio plenty of times when I was a kid, and I always took from Pinocchio that Pinocchio couldn't lie because his nose would grow, which is true. But in the film, his nose only grows one time. Like literally just one time his nose grows. It is not the lesson of the movie. In fact, it's just like an adding supporting thing that lying is no good. But in my mind, Pinocchio was a puppet who wanted to be a real boy, and so he had to go through like life and learn to navigate it properly. And that Pinocchio, when he would lie, his nose would grow bigger, and so he had to learn not to lie. That's like what I thought Pinocchio was about. Basically, I had it in my mind that when we were gonna watch Pinocchio, we were gonna watch this little puppet who, you know, in order to become a real boy, had to learn to listen to his conscience and learn not to lie. Like, I thought the principal or the main storyline in the movie was Pinocchio's nose. But that is just not the main storyline, and the main storyline is so much creepier. So now, let's get into the story of Pinocchio from the 1940s movie. So the movie begins by showing this home that kind of appears to be a shop at first, but it's the home and the shop of a man named Geppetto who lives alone with his cat Figaro and his fish Cleo. Starts out with Jiminy Cricket, who appears to be like homeless, sneaking into the house and like kind of deciding he's gonna crash there for the night, and he's just hanging out. Now, one thing that I will note is that I noticed in the film, there was a couple of like hidden like sexualizations with Jiminy Cricket. because like there's little statues around and he's like bumping into the bums of them and getting shy and stuff. But that's just like typical Disney stuff, throwing in that adult humor that kids won't necessarily pick up on. So it begins with Geppetto kind of admiring this beautiful puppet that he made that he loved so much that he would name Pinocchio. And there's like this dance scene where he's moving Pinocchio's strings around and dancing around with him, and like Cleo and Figaro are in on it, and it's just this moment where he's in love with this puppet that he made. Then he's getting ready for bed, and as he does, he looks over at Pinocchio and says that he almost looks like a real boy, and wouldn't it be great if he could be a real boy? As they're about to go to sleep, he realizes that he didn't open up the window, and so he has Figaro, the cat, go and open up the window. When he opens up the window, there's like this big, beautiful star, and he decides he has to wish on the star, and he says, "Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight." I don't know. I'm just adding that in because that's actually something I do every single time I see a star that looks special. That's totally a side note, but I found it interesting that he says the exact thing pretty well that I say when I wish on stars. That's probably where I got it from as a kid. But he decides to wish upon this star and wish for Pinocchio to be a real boy. Then, as they fall asleep, in through the window comes this beautiful, like, fairy godmother who decides that since Geppetto has done so much good, that his wish should be granted and that Pinocchio could be a real boy. But there's a catch. In order for Pinocchio to become fully a real boy, he has to prove himself to be unselfish, truthful, and brave. She explains to Pinocchio that he has to learn to choose between right and wrong by following his conscience. And Pinocchio then asks her, well, what's a conscience? And Jiminy Cricket comes down and starts trying to explain what a conscience is. Basically, when all is said and done, the fairy godmother grants Jiminy Cricket to be Pinocchio's conscience to guide him down the straight and narrow path. Geppetto wakes up, and after being super startled that his puppet is now like a wooden real boy, but not a real boy, you know what I'm saying? He's like a wooden boy who can walk and talk and has feelings and thoughts and emotions. And after being scared of that, he decides that he is so delighted that Pinocchio is in fact now alive. The following day, he decides that Pinocchio must attend school and sends him off to school with an apple in his hand, and off Pinocchio goes all by himself to school after just one night of being alive, which I found kind of funny and strange, but hey, it's a Disney film. I'm not judging this part. Then the next scene introduces the villains, a cat named Gideon and a fox named Honest John. Ironically enough, because he's not nearly honest at all. These two villains see on a poster that a man named Stromboli, who runs a marionette show, is in town, and then they get their sights on Pinocchio. They say, a live puppet with no strings that ought to be worth a fortune. And then they click that they could probably sell Pinocchio or give Pinocchio to Stromboli because he has a marionette show, and here's Pinocchio skipping on his way to school with no strings, but yet he's made of wood. They, not so discreetly, but discreetly to innocent Pinocchio, trip him, and when the apologies are exchanged, Pinocchio explains to them that he is on his way to school. That's when they tell him that nonsense, he looks like a natural-born actor. They could make him famous, and Pinocchio tries to say, no, 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 I must go to school. But in the end, they convince him that fame is the way for him. There's actually a whole song about how there's an actor's life for him, this actor's life is for Pinocchio, and off Pinocchio goes when, oops, Jiminy Cricket, who's supposed to be his conscience, slept in and goes running looking for Pinocchio. Jiminy catches up to Pinocchio, tries to explain to him that they are temptation, that is the opposite of what he should be doing to go down a straight and narrow path, but a naive Pinocchio heads on off with them anyways. It then jumps to a scene where Pinocchio is now up on the stage in this marionette show dancing as a puppet with no strings, and Jiminy Cricket takes a look, sees that he's becoming such a success, and decides that he must not need him anymore anyways, because what does an actor need or want with a conscience? At this point, Geppetto's realizing that Pinocchio has not returned from school, says nobody eats till he finds Pinocchio, and heads on out looking for him. Then it jumps to a scene where Pinocchio is in Stromboli's like little trailer, and Stromboli is counting all this money that Pinocchio has made him with this phenomenal show. At this point, Pinocchio decides to tell him, hey, listen, I'm gonna head back and tell my father all about this. I'll return in the morning. And that's when Stromboli throws him into a bird cage and tells him that he is his now. This is the first sign of where this movie's about to go and how dark this movie's about to get. And I know it might seem a little bit annoying, you guys, that I'm giving you a play-by-play of the whole movie, but in order to understand how dark it really is, I have to explain to you how this movie jumps from one scene to another and where Pinocchio winds up. So this scene with Stromboli is the first scene that really just goes, ooh, or makes you go, ooh, I don't know about this movie. Stromboli then tells Pinocchio, and I quote, "You will make lots of money for me. And when you are growing too old, you will make great firewood. And then the camera pans over to like a firewood box with what looks like another wooden boy in it. At this point, they start taking off for the night because now Pinocchio is gonna be a touring little puppet with no strings, and he starts screaming out and whistling for Jiminy Cricket, but Jiminy Cricket can't hear him. However, Jiminy Cricket decides that he wants to at least say goodbye to Pinocchio, and so he goes into the trailer just to say goodbye and wish him well when he finds him locked up in the cage. He tries to like pick the lock of the cage, but he's unable to, and the two of them feel so defeated. The fairy godmother then comes to see Pinocchio, and when she asks him why he didn't go to school, Pinocchio decides to not tell the truth, at which point his nose grows and grows and grows and grows so big it actually gets like animated birds and a bird's nest on it and all of that jazz. And she begins to explain to him that a lie once told becomes as evident as like the nose on your face or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but the principle of it was that, hey, when you lie, it eventually comes to a head. You can eventually tell that it's a lie and it's just not the right thing to do. She decides to forgive him this once and to set him free, but explains to him that this is the last time that she can intervene. He needs to listen to his conscience and he needs to stay on a straight and narrow path. Here is where the movie gets so gross, you guys, and like blew my mind. So that is the only time, by the way, that Pinocchio's nose actually grows. And like I said, for some reason, I envisioned Pinocchio's nose growing throughout the whole movie. Like I thought that was what Pinocchio was. He was learning not to lie. I thought that was the lesson, but it wasn't. And at this point, the movie pans back to those two villains talking with like this creepy looking man. They're saying to him how dumb Pinocchio was for falling for their trap. And as they're saying this creepy man gets like this look over him like he's scheming and has a brilliant idea. He then proceeds to tell them that he is collecting stupid little boys. More specifically, he tells them the disobedient ones that play hooky from school, and then he whispers to them a whole bunch of stuff that we will never know, suggesting to them that they could make some real money off of it. He then explains to them that he takes the boys to Pleasure Island.
And I takes him to Pleasure Island.
And the two villains say back, Pleasure Island? But the law, suppose they... But the villain replies, no, they never come back as boys.
There's no risk. They never come back as boys.
He takes them to Pleasure Island. The law's not a worry because the boys never come back as boys. Can you see where this is going? He then tells them any prospects that they can find to bring them to him, and then he will in turn give them money for it. And then it shoots back to Pinocchio, who now has it in his head he is gonna stay on the straight and narrow path until he runs into those two villains again. He tells the villains he doesn't want to be an actor anymore. He learned his lesson. The naive Pinocchio even tells them, like, you know, he was trying to keep me and he wasn't a good man. And they play along like, oh no, like, oh my goodness. Then they tell him that he is allergic. He's having an allergic reaction and that the cure to this is a trip to Pleasure Island, the happy land of carefree boys where every day is a holiday. Pinocchio tries to tell them, no, I can't do that. And might I add, you guys, so Pinocchio was racing Jiminy Cricket home at this time. So Jiminy Cricket is not around again during this particular conversation. And eventually they convince Pinocchio that this is a great idea, that he should go to Pleasure Island. And the next scene is that creepy man in a carriage full of little boys who are all excited to go to Pleasure Island. Pinocchio is sitting next to another boy who tells him how great this is gonna be, and the whole scene is just super unsettling. They have to be taken to Pleasure Island by a boat, and once they get to Pleasure Island, it's basically like this whole space of naughty things, like really bad things for these boys to be doing. And I also want to note that they get locked on like Pleasure Island by these dark, almost like demonic looking creature things that lock them in there. And immediately there's cigarettes being thrown down to them. There's houses for them to destruct. There's fighting rooms. Jiminy Cricket starts looking for Pinocchio and finds himself on Pleasure Island, where he then proceeds to walk through a very empty looking space. There's no other boys, which is contrary to the scene before where all these boys are running around. They are so excited. And then it flashes to Pinocchio with that friend that he made on the ride there. And they're in what looks like a bar. They're drinking beer. There's a pool table. Pinocchio's smoking. and it's just like really not good. Jiminy Cricket shows up, there's a whole confrontational scene, and in turn, Jiminy Cricket gets frustrated and decides to leave. But as he's leaving, he is met by perhaps the most disturbing scene of the whole entire movie. As he's leaving, he's met with a scene of all of these donkeys being loaded into crates to be shipped to different places. And as he's looking at this, he notices that when these donkeys are asked what their name is, if they reply like in a donkey voice, like ee-aw, they get put into the crate to be shipped off, they're ready. But if they can still remember their names and talk like little boys do, then they're not ready yet to be shipped off. Just as you see this scene, Pinocchio's friend takes a big sip of beer and starts turning into a donkey himself. And Pinocchio starts freaking out and actually starts turning a little bit into a donkey as well. He gets donkey ears, he gets a donkey tail, and he like hee-haws. Like, that sounds so weird, but he does like the donkey noise. But he doesn't fully change. And that's when Jiminy Cricket shows up, tells Pinocchio that he knows the way off, the only way off, and they jump off and escape. When they rush home, they realize that Pinocchio's father is not there at all. And as they're sitting there defeated, they receive a letter saying that while he was looking for Pinocchio, he got swallowed by a big giant whale in the ocean. It then shows a scene of Pinocchio's father, the cat, and the fish, all inside of this big giant whale. And in summary, Pinocchio eventually gets down to that part of the ocean, still with his donkey ears and donkey tail. He finds his way inside of the whale. He's reunited with his father, and his father tries to explain to him that there's no way out. His father realizes that he has donkey ears and a donkey tail, but then in the end, when Pinocchio doesn't really want to tell him, he looks shameful. He decides that it's okay as long as Pinocchio's okay. And Pinocchio comes up with this scheme to make a huge fire inside the whale to make the whale sneeze, so that the whale will spit them out and they can be saved. Pinocchio ends up saving them, but then Pinocchio dies. Pinocchio dies from this adventure underwater trying to save everybody. Now everybody's really sad about Pinocchio's death, and it flashes back to Pinocchio back in their house on the bed, apparently not alive. But echoing is prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish, and you'll become a real boy. And miraculously, like every good happy ending, Pinocchio awakens as a real boy. Jiminy Cricket heads out to leave because Pinocchio no longer needs him anymore. He's developed his own conscience as he's a real boy, and he thanks the fairy godmother, who then gives him a pin saying that he's an official conscience. So why is Pinocchio so dark and creepy now that we've kind of summarized the whole entire film? So first and foremost, I would say what I took away from the movie is that the entire movie premise is based on the fact between right and wrong, and the consequences of your actions if you don't do what's right, if you don't follow your conscience, and the situations that you could find yourself winding up in, which is a great message, but I find Pinocchio took it to extreme measures. By him not listening to Jiminy Cricket and by him not following his conscience, Pinocchio found himself stolen in the property of somebody else. And once he got himself out of that situation, he found himself stolen and sold to go to Pleasure Island, where he would never return as a boy and will be shipped off in crates to unknown buyers. To me, this represents the concept of trafficking. If you think about it, they take boys who are troubled, boys who skip school, and they bring these boys to Pleasure Island, where they have them indulge and consume all these different things that cloud their vision and cloud their judgment. And they have them consume beer that is laced with something to turn them into something that they are not. And once they lose sense of their identity and they're consumed by becoming whatever they're not, in this case donkeys, they are then put in crates and shipped off to unknown buyers. Now, not always, but a common theme in some aspects of human trafficking is that they will target individuals who are troubled, individuals who there's nobody who would really miss them, or on top of that, they're more gullible, they're more accepting to go to this great place where things are great and they can have beer and they can have all the things that they aren't supposed to have. And therefore, when these people turn up missing, you know, they've always skipped school, they're troubled. It could be something other than they were stolen and sold, if that makes sense. I think the saddest part about it is that they convince these boys that Pleasure Island is this wonderful place for them, that they will have so much fun there, it'll be such a great experience, and then in turn, the beer that they're drinking is laced and it turns them into something that they are not, to where they are no longer boys, they are owned and sold to these unknown buyers, which to me is just dark and disturbing and creepy, to be honest. And I don't even remember that from Pinocchio when I was growing up. Then there's the theory that the story of Pinocchio actually depicts the dark side of Hollywood and the dark side of fame, and more specifically child fame. Because if we go back to the beginning of the movie, Pinocchio was supposed to go to school, but instead he was told and deceived that he was a natural born actor and was told that they could promise him fame in this wonderful life. Pinocchio was all keen to give up on school, give up on his youth, and go to work as an actor until it became the polar opposite and he became that person's property. During this scene, Pinocchio sings a song about not having any strings on him and how he's free, while all of these other marionettes dance around him with strings on them. Now, there's a lot of unwanted sexual attention coming to Pinocchio from all of these women marionettes. They like say that they'd do anything for him, and it's just very strange, especially because he's a boy and you can tell he's uncomfortable and naive. But at the end of the scene, he winds up tangled up in all of these strings. After the fact, he winds up in Stromboli's trailer where Stromboli is counting up all of these gold coins, all this money that Pinocchio made him. However, he hands Pinocchio like a piece of metal or silver, something that was worthless to him, and says, "This is for you." And a very naive Pinocchio is so excited about making that, even though he doesn't recognize that this person is profiting off of him completely and giving him nothing, which at times can be a sad reality of some Hollywood stories. There have been plenty of cases where child actors and actors in general, or singers, or people who are contractually connected to record labels or films or anything of those sorts, where they don't get a very big cut of the income that they're providing, of the money that they're making. And this is just a very sad example of that. And then when Stromboli goes ahead and says that Pinocchio is only of use to him until he grows too old and then he'll make good firewood, it's basically just saying he's good when he's a child. He'll profit off him, he'll put his face everywhere, but once he gets too old, he's worth nothing to him. Then there's another theory that this is a tale on religion, and that Jiminy Cricket, his conscience, is actually just like a different name for Jesus Christ, who Pinocchio should have been following this whole entire time, but he goes down the road of temptation and finds himself in dark, demonic situations. This also kind of becomes supported by the fact that when he gets to Pleasure Island, it's being closed up by, like I said, these like kind of demonic looking creatures, or shadow figures actually. That's a way better explanation. They're like shadow figures. And Jiminy Cricket has to keep bailing him out of these situations that Pinocchio keeps finding himself in. Overall, you guys, like I said, I thought Pinocchio was about this puppet who wanted to be a real boy, who would lie and his nose would grow, but his nose only grows once in the whole film, and instead Pinocchio almost gets sold in a crate and was also kidnapped and is deceived by these characters, and it's just so dark and so creepy. That's basically the disturbing storyline of Pinocchio. Is it how you guys remember it? Is it like the story of Pinocchio that when you reminisced on Pinocchio as an adult and you thought about it, that you thought it was? Am I the only one who didn't really pick up on this and had no recollection of Pinocchio almost being sold, or being sold actually a couple of times, and finding himself in these situations that are so much darker? Let me know in the comments below. Also, from what I told you guys, what do you think Pinocchio is truly about? Do you think it has that Hollywood aspect? Do you think it's about trafficking? Do you think it's about religion? Or do you think it's just about moral compass overall and staying on a straight and narrow path? There's also a theory that Pinocchio is just a tale to keep kids in school, and that it was a way of like showing extreme measures of what can happen when you don't behave yourself and do what you're meant to do. But definitely let me know in the comments below. And that is it for today's video. If you guys are new to my channel, or you are just not yet subscribed but you do enjoy my videos, I would super love it if you would go ahead and click that subscribe button, and please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness, and until next time, I love you.